My husband had no idea how we went from paying $156 a month to $29 a month for car insurance. I've been handling our finances for years now, and this was our
To This Week in Clown World with Ben and Hobbs. So sit back, relax, take your black pill, and enjoy the show. Well, Hobbs just dropped here. He's coming back in, though. Here he is.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's This Week in Clown World with Ben and Hobbs. I'm Hobbs, he's Ben. You're in Clown World, but you knew that already. How is everyone tonight?
Well, I'm hoping we can avoid any technical issues. Seems like I've got him narrowed down finally.
Awesome. Very good. That's what you get for being an IT guy. The gremlins
Yeah,
will come
right.
for you the hardest.
I actually got set up a half hour early just to keep it from happening.
Yeah,
So
and
we'll
I got
see how
here
it
about a
goes.
half an hour late, so you had plenty of time.
So no doubt my internet will conk out tonight, but thanks for joining on your Saturday, everybody. Um, still pretty clowny.
Yeah.
It's just
Big,
like it's like Groundhog's Day at this point.
yeah. Biggest biggest news story of the political cycle is the guy from Fear Factor interviewing the guy from The Apprentice. Who would
Yeah,
have
who
thought?
would have thought? If that's not idiocracy, I don't know what is.
Yeah, but it was actually pretty good. I watched it last night, and there were a few parts that I came away a little bit disappointed on, but you can't bat 1,000 all the time.
Yeah, I thought Joe was a little weak on what he asked him or how he would pursue things.
Hmm.
Um, Other than that, not too bad. Uh, what has the left been saying about this interview? Have they been picking anything out of it that you've seen so far?
I've been on the internet today, and I haven't seen much of anything. It's almost like they want to ignore it because typically you can judge about how effective something is when the left just has a complete brain gasket blow,
Right.
but they don't seem to be talking about it as much right now. Maybe because it was a 3 hour long form interview and they just don't have the patience to sit through it. But we'll see. Give it a day or two.
I've just noticed I keep having some weird Mad Max action going on. So I don't
Yeah, I know.
I
I
don't know if
saw
you're
that.
picking it up.
Yeah, I am seeing it, and it's like, when did Ben become Max Headroom?
We're doing total 80s throwback. I'm becoming Max Headroom.
Yep.
That is crazy. But hopefully it isn't too distracting to people. I have no idea what it's about. I am an actual person, not an AI created. uh, yeah, it's kind of weird that they're doing a blackout on it. It's like they don't want to, it's a political strategy. Don't mention your opponent, which the Harris campaign hasn't stuck to at all. I mean, all they do is Trump, 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 Trump when they're up there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I'm surprised it's not a bigger meme at this point. But whenever somebody asks Harris a tough question, she begins the answer with, "Well, let's talk about Donald Trump." And it's like, no, can we not?
Does
We've
that
done.
bizarre laugh and then starts talking about him.
Yeah.
She had a pretty big media moment today, also that coincided with Trump's. She had a huge. People thought it was going to be a Beyonce concert. Uh, Turned out to not be the case at all. Uh,
Yeah.
JD Dillon, somebody in the chat says JD Vance went on Tim Dillon's podcast released today. Uh, Comedy Top Shots are all for Trump and Vance.
Hell yeah. There you go.
And yeah, he's going to be at Madison Square Garden tomorrow, I guess.
Like
Speaking of
the
comedy,
Nazis in
yeah,
1939. Come the
even
fuck
people
on.
on I saw an Instagram reel today of shit, I forget the dude's name. Anyways, he's Jewish. It'll come to me later in the show. Joe Rappaport. You remember
Michael
him?
Rappaport?
Or Michael Rappaport, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Um, he was bitching out the left for using this whole Nazi thing. Like, he is not Hitler. Quit
Yeah.
saying it. You're weakening the word.
Hmm.
You're doing a disservice to people that actually did die to Hitler by calling Trump Hitler. Yeah, there was a rally in Madison Square Garden by actual Nazis. You can find
Yeah.
pictures of it. it was swastikas hanging from the rafters and the whole 9 yards. Trump going there is not a fascism rally.
Right. Yeah. It's like if you're having to reach 85 years back in the Wayback Machine to find a 1939 rally that Nazis did in one of the most famous venues in the world, everybody knows the name Madison Square Gardens. You're reaching 85 years back to try and draw some tenuous connection between Donald Trump and the American Nazi Party of 1939. My brother in Christ, please do not dislocate your shoulder reaching so hard.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they know more than I do, but is New York really in play? Is it gotten that bad for Harris?
You know what? You're the second person that I've heard utter that phrase. Is New York in play? Because you watch these man in the street videos, and yeah, it might be. You got the Manhattan upper crust of society. They're all in on Harris because they're all part of the machine, right? But you talk to your average Joe in the Bronx or in Queens or whatever, and it's Trump 2024, man. And there's a lot more of them than there are the other types. New York might be in play.
If especially after that disaster of I mean, if Harris pulls some of that shit in New York that she had happen in Houston, and people on the left were like, why is she even in Houston? Texas is not in play whatsoever, which the Democrats are always like, oh, it's going to turn purple. It's going to go blue. And most of the people that they were interviewing outside of this rally that Harris had were like, yeah, I don't know why she was here. She'd be better off in a border or in a toss-up state. I just came to see Beyonce, and Beyonce didn't even come out for more than 2 minutes.
Yeah. This is the second time that they've used Beyonce as a bait and switch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Beyonce and Taylor Swift were alleged to do something at the DNC, which never came to fruition. And now Beyonce was supposed to do something at this rally, and she didn't come out and do any songs. So it's like, fool me once, shame on me. Fool on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Right?
Yeah, I was watching some videos of it. I mean, after she came off the stage, people just started booing and heading for the exits. Harris was heckled throughout.
Yep.
And
that's her base.
Yeah, that's her. I know. I don't know that I've heard much heckling at a Trump rally. Maybe they're better at squashing it, or yeah, I don't know. It looks ugly.
Yeah. If things, I mean, even with the degree of fraud or a degree of fraud, this, I don't want to like be too white pilled on it or anything, but this might end up being worse than Reagan Mondale. Reagan won every state except Mondale's home state, which was like Michigan, I think.
I think it's Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even that was close.
Yeah. Yeah, the longer this goes on, the worse it's looking for. I mean, I don't think, did we show on the show last week with the Vegas odds? I think we did. I mean, that's continuing to widen.
Yeah.
Some leftist media heads were talking about, they're like, oh, well, Vegas is just doing that to appeal to white men to try to get them to bet on Trump so they can win their money. But apparently they don't realize how betting works. I mean, if white men were going to, I mean, surely you throw $20 on Harris just in case, because you're not going to want to bet, I think it was 100 and you have to bet $160 on Trump to win 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to do that.
Yeah. They obviously don't know how betting markets work. Yeah, it's, there's a part of me that wants to be like, okay, even with the oversampling of Democrats that the pollsters do, and the weighted polls and the mainstream media being all in for Harris, and they've gone past the point of taking things out of context or spinning a story desperation straight into just making shit up desperation. Even with all of that, seeing the polls coming out as they are, part of me wants to be happy and be like, this is going to be an absolute blowout. But the other part of me is like, what if we're being set up for another F-shaped graph because they want the violence?
Well, and Bongino's been preaching the early voting a lot. What is it about? And I haven't watched a show where he went into detail on it. Why do they think the early voting is going to be their savior this time? Why?
Because the thing about on the day of voting is each ballot has to have a name attached to it, right? You can't just fudge the numbers because then you can go back through the voting rules. The purpose of the early voting is to get your ballot with your name locked in so that on the off chance that something should happen on election day, like your car breaks down or they run out of printer ink or any of the other shenanigans that would go on election day, you're locked in. There's no way that in the middle of the night they go through the voter rolls, they see who hasn't voted yet, and then they fill in those ballots for those names. That's the purpose of the early voting thing, to get your name locked in. Yes, I voted, and they can't change it because you'll have a printed out sheet with the results that you voted for in the event that your name comes up as being suspicious.
I don't really see how that saves them from late night fuckery, though. Or that's showing, they want to show that they're so far ahead early that it's going to discourage it.
That's also a possibility.
I saw Simon popped in down here.
Yep.
Let me throw him up in here. Hold on, he's not here quite yet. Simon, you hear us?
I can hear you fine, guys.
Hey, Simon,
doing,
long
buddy?
time no see.
I've actually been pretty poorly for a week, but I'm recovering. So I'm pleased to hear that you guys are doing a show tonight. Thank you very much for your invite.
I caught your show a couple times. Is Sam doing okay? Did he get sick too?
No, he had some other out of town family commitments, but he's going to be back on Sunday, and in theory I'll be on Galloway, and I got invited to go on with Patrick Henningson, who was formerly with TNT, but that whole company went bust. So most of the staff set up their own kind of cooperative. It's called Alternate Current Radio, and he has a show at 12 New York time on Sunday. So assuming I'm still alive, I'll be on that as well.
Somebody asked if you're recovering from being British. I'm not sure if that. He's been recovering from that for years now. Yeah, I think he's fully recovered from it.
Yeah,
at this point.
Yeah.
So, what's new, man? You do sound a little bit under the weather. Hope you are feeling better.
I'm literally participating in bed. So I guess I am truly taking part, as Ben would say, in the late night fuckery, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to go to bed, man, you
No.
go to bed.
I've got the invite. I let you down last week, and I'm happy to be on for a while. And there's obviously been quite a lot going on in the Middle East, and there was that BRICS summit on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as well. I'm kind of like the only English-speaking person in the whole world apparently to have read the entire document.
Yeah. With the BRICS thing.
The thing I'd like to get into is Israel's response to Iran. It seemed a little underwhelming, or was it just the targets they hit were that secret that?
No, I didn't. They took out their rocket fuel processing plant that was only like 3 years old. So apparently that was already a bottleneck for their missile rocket manufacturing, and having apparently utterly demolished that relatively new factory, it's now caused a huge problem for the Iranians to replace whatever they expend in future. And then the other thing that they seems to have done is they've really focused on taking out the Iranian air defense system. So whilst they haven't followed up and destroyed all of the things that the air defense were protecting, they've essentially kind of like left them wandering around the desert naked, and they can kind of like come back at any point.
Yeah, taking out the air defense seems to insinuate there will be a strike 2.0.
Well, this
At a
was
later
already
date.
in three waves, and they fired all the missiles that they fired from Iraqi airspace. They didn't even come within 100 kilometers of the Iranian border. But that's been quite embarrassing for the Iraqis because their air force is essentially entirely run by American contractors. So that's made them look, very dependent upon the United States. And the Jordanians kept on saying, oh, well, we won't let anyone use our airspace. We won't let the Iranians, and we'll shoot it down if they fire any drones or missiles. And we won't let the Israelis fly through our airspace. And that, as anticipated, turned out to be total and utter hokum. And the F-16s and 15s and 35s were just flying backwards and forwards over Jordan like the kingdom doesn't even exist.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing I saw. They used a lot of F-16s, which do not stand up well to anti-air radar at all. So they
fired standoff missiles from at least 100 kilometers away.
Now, were a lot of these AA sites protecting like military bases or
yes,
industrial?
So
okay.
The Biden administration did apparently manage to persuade them to restrict themselves to clear-cut military targets, which is what the Iranians had done previously. And they obviously did it late at night, so there weren't so many staff at these facilities, so that kept the casualty numbers down. And people are saying that it was kind of like an underwhelming response, but I think it was done in a manner such that those who know realize that it kind of like proved the point that the Iranians are relatively vulnerable because they have very little in the way of air force, right? They have like a handful of Sukhoi 35s and some, 45-year-old F-14s or something. I saw one report, though, that the Israelis were flying an F-15 that had been severely damaged in 1983, rebuilt, and were using it on the operation today. That kind of surprised me, to be
solid
honest.
Platform.
That's either
but like 42 years old or something.
That's either very desperate or a flex.
Yeah. So.
Well, I thought these skirmishes between Iran and Israel are weird. It's like, Iran shoots some missiles in. They're like, oh, we're gonna wait now and see what happens, and then Israel strikes, and Iran's like, oh, okay, well, they hit some stuff. We're good now. It's such a weird back and forth between them. It's almost like theater.
Well, the Iranians really don't want to end up going to war with America, so they're trying to maintain some degree of strategic deterrence, but they don't want to whack the aardvarks hard enough that the Biden administration will step in and say we have to kind of like, nuke the Iranians because they're going to drive the Israelis into this.
So Iran where we've talked about how it seems with modern warfare, you figure out where the rules are. Is Iran maybe just trying to figure out where the line is and not step over it?
I mean, they've had this concept for a long time of what they called strategic patience. They've claimed that policy has been discarded. And now when a Iranian Iranian aircraft or ship or an Iranian citizen is killed anywhere, then they will respond in full. But so far, we haven't really seen that because they had their ambassador wounded in the pager attack.
Mhm.
They had Haniyeh killed hours after the presidential inauguration. I mean, they've been pretty severely hammered. They've lost generals in Lebanon and in Syria. So at the moment, they haven't responded in a particularly impressive way so far.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. So at this point, is Iran considering their response enough payback for the pagers?
I mean, they lost over 3,000 people wounded.
Yeah.
It was a huge blow. And there's now, I was just reading an article, some firm that are following obituaries basically in the Lebanese newspapers. And they say that as of today, there's like 1,020 dead Hezbollah guys that they actually have like photographs and obituaries for.
Huh.
So not like some kind of random speculation. That obviously is left to me. And they are taking pretty severe casualties. But the Israelis are getting whacked hard. I mean, they've progressed a very, very short distance indeed inside Lebanon, and they've lost, I don't know, 32, 34 tanks.
34 tanks in Lebanon. Wow.
Yeah. They're losing a huge number of tanks in Lebanon.
That's just something that you don't really hear much in modern warfare, aside from Ukraine, is a loss of armor on that magnitude.
Yeah,
Especially if
they're Merkava 3s and 4s. They're their top spec stuff.
Yeah, it's you obviously when we rolled into Iraq, we laid waste to the Iraqi tank brigades by the dozens, but that was kind of an overmatch thing of having to hear
that was
modern...
normally after they'd surrendered, right? People like McGregor just shooting the hell out of them once they were trying to retreat, having announced that they were going home.
Yeah, but when you hear about a first world military losing top of the line modern main battle tanks in numbers like that, you're kind of wondering like what's really going on.
Yeah, well, they're finding out that some of the Iranian and Russian anti-tank guided missiles are actually quite effective.
So are they losing these tanks in like urban settings or just open desert or?
The border with Lebanon really isn't open desert. It's kind of hilly and slightly forested.
Oh, okay. Huh. So that's a lot like the terrain they might be fighting in Ukraine, which they lost a lot of tanks in too.
Yeah.
It seems like modern warfare tanks are becoming more and more of just a target.
I think a lot of armored vehicles are becoming a target. Yeah, with between drones and decent anti-tank guided missiles. Yeah, it's very problematic.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll have to keep an eye on that and see if Iran has any other responses. You want to tell us?
I mean, they have the foreign ministry put out a statement saying that they would, respond in a time and place of their choosing, very American-esque. The Russians. Oh, I don't know, it's astonishing that they still don't seem to have signed this comprehensive cooperation agreement that they said was going to be signed at Kazan. Then they said they were going to not be a distraction and they were going to have a separate signing ceremony in Moscow. And much to my amazement, that didn't happen today or yesterday. So, I mean, they really are under the gun. They need to get that done and ratified by both parliaments as well. Well,
Russia's been taking some heat. I saw they took some heat from India about BRICS. India was like, all right, guys, we've been meeting I'm paraphrasing, but we've been meeting for 20 years and we haven't done anything yet. What are we even doing? I mean, can you comment on that?
I wouldn't. I mean, there was two. Okay, so difficult to summarize. The Kazan Declaration, which they put out on Wednesday night,
Mhm.
is over 12,000 words long. And there's two big takeaways from it. One is they've agreed, all the BRICS countries, to push back hard on carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which Canada and the European Union are in the process of introducing. So economically, that's very, very significant that they're going to push back hard on those. But the other issue is that what a lot of people may not have noticed, because they're largely been happening in Russia and its regional capitals, is whilst Russia has been the chairperson of BRICS in 2024, they've conducted over 200 BRICS meetings so far. So people think it's just the big annual summit, but they've created the most mind-boggling number of councils, alliances, forums, partnerships, general get-togethers, and kind of like, family reunions that you could possibly imagine for like every single type of societal or civil gain. And rolling forward, when China is going to be the chairperson, it looks set to continue. And in the summit declaration, there's just countless references. It's like 134 paragraphs long. It's 32 pages. And there's just like reference after reference after reference of, oh, we had this meeting for the first time 2 months ago. Oh, we had this meeting for the first time a month ago. And this list of these organizations that they have created, which essentially, whilst they say that they don't want to replace the United Nations, they have essentially generated a parallel United Nations, because some of these things are clearly being duplicated. And now they've invited in 13 partner organizations. So they've created a second tier of membership, but they still haven't published the charter for the original group that obviously got doubled in size last year. So they didn't add any new full members this year. But they now have Belarus, Cuba, 4 members of the ASEAN, Association of Countries. And, they're representing a very large percentage of the global population.
So you said that they've essentially constructed a parallel United Nations. Like what is that all about?
So people think the United Nations is just about peacekeeping, but that's just a tiny, tiny fraction of all of the activities that they actually engage in an annual basis. I mean, we've got disaster risk reduction, and there's the World Food Program and the World Health Organization,
Right?
International Atomic Energy. They're all part of the ICJ. They're all part of the UN. And so they have like counter-terrorism task forces and conventions on climate change and against tobacco and small arms proliferation, and the Biological Weapons Convention and the Chemical Weapons Convention and the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and all of these things all basically run out of the UN, right? So all of those and more things have now been duplicated, albeit with 10 countries plus 13 observers now, rather than 195 countries in the UN.
So the way that I'm kind of picturing all of this that you're saying in my head is almost like because in the actual UN, you've got Great Britain, France, China, Russia, and the United States are all on the Security Council. Those are the top dogs of the UN
with the vetoes.
Yeah, with the vetoes and everything. And so you you take the United States, Great Britain, and France out, you still got two members in Russia and China on the UN Security Council who are key members of this new BRICS, which is essentially doing the exact same thing. Is this almost a way to delegitimize the actual United Nations and freeze out kind of the key West members, so to speak?
They specifically say that it's being done in cooperation and coordination with the UN and not in competition with it. But, the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding seems pretty anti-UN, to be honest.
Right. It's just when you've got China and Russia, they already have that Security Council veto. They're one of the 5 top dogs on the UN.
But this is not to duplicate the UN. This is because every time they try and do anything binding, the United States vetoes.
Yeah, so it's just freezing out the vetoes.
Yeah, they talk a lot about the World Trade Organization in the declaration as well, and they're saying that there's a whole load of commissioner vacancies and there's a whole load of international business appeals court vacancies. That's not the technical name, but it gives you the impression of it. And America's been, because they know that the sanctions that Trump put in place and that Biden has maintained regarding China are illegal. And so America's been refusing to participate in the confirmation of the judges to move up to the WTO appeals board in order that they won't be repeatedly ruled against.
Okay, that seems to make a lot more sense. So if the BRICS countries are making this sort of a parallel alliance, do you think that this is going to be something that the sort of underdeveloped, the global South is going to turn to them rather than the UN if they ever need, like, UN peacekeepers or, any of the other things that the BRICS are now constructing in parallel? If these, disenfranchised, smaller countries go to this, BRICS UN versus the real UN, then how is that going to affect the kind of global dynamics of power?
Well, I just want to throw something out there too. Maybe their peacekeeping force would be less Nazi and less rapey than the UN peacekeepers.
Also a possibility.
So, China's been contributing quite a lot of forces to UN peacekeeping in the last decade. The UN doesn't have a standing army. It's reliant upon other nations to make a battalion here and a company there actually available. And they all get paid, or rather out of the UN budget, their parent country get paid a flat fee per soldier per day. So for some countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh and a load of African countries, often the fee they pay per soldier per day is vastly in excess of what a private from, China or Bangladesh would get in their normal pay packet. So some of those poor countries actually get to make a profit, quite a big profit, out of assigning thousands of their national armies to the UN forces. But then, when we see kind of push comes to shove, like in South Lebanon, they really turn out to be quite a paper tiger. They drive around in their kind of like white painted, thin-skinned armored vehicles. And
right.
They're not particularly useful in combat.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily talking about smaller countries contributing to the UN peacekeepers so as much as I was smaller countries seeking aid from this sort of like BRICS UN, whether it be their version of the food bank or the monetary fund or peacekeepers or anything like that. If these smaller countries start going to the BRICS rather than the actual UN, like, what does that do to kind of upset the balance of power that the UN has kind of been at the top of the heap of for the past 80 years. Did we lose you?
him?
No, still here, guys.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. We did have a little bit of a drop out there. I couldn't quite hear your question. Would you mind repeating it, please?
Oh, yeah. So I was saying, like, I wasn't necessarily asking about the smaller countries contributing their troops to the UN peacekeepers as much as I was asking about these smaller countries seeking aid from the UN. When you have like a civil war in Africa or something, and they go to the UN to kind of mediate it or whatever, what starts happening if these smaller countries start going to BRICS and utilizing their services?
Oh, no. So that is definitely a different mechanism. So they're very much pushing for regional organizations to do the conflict resolution, as opposed to having to go to the UN. Yeah. So in that regard, they are seeking a workaround. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't necessarily have to go to the UN Security Council, but that's been the case in theory for Africa for several years, where they've had this whole thing called African Problems, African Solutions.
Right. So if they're going to the BRICS instead of the UN, doesn't that kind of upset the apple cart on the monopoly on power that the UN has allegedly got, in theory?
Well, I mean, the UN is essentially made up of regions when it comes to voting for the Security Council membership and heads of various organizations. They often vote in blocks, and they have kind of like a rotating system as for which region will provide the chairperson for various organizations. That's the same for the UN president of the General Assembly as well. But I don't think at this point now they're looking to replace the UN lock, stock and barrel. I mean, it is in some regards quite dysfunctional at the moment, in particular with regards to basically what the Aardvarks are up to, kind of whacking the Lebanese and people in the West Bank. And, I mean, they are generally fighting on 7 fronts now. You think they've got kind of like, West Bank and East Jerusalem. That's 1. Gaza's 2. Lebanon's 3. Yemen's 4. Syria's 5. And then they've got Iraq and Iran. That's 7.
Yeah.
So I thought some other interesting news out of that, Simon, to keep it on the BRICS thing, was that India and China agreed to end their 4 years long border dispute.
Yeah. So they actually agreed that the day before, and at the kind of ministerial level, and then their respective presidents and prime ministers who hadn't met for 5 years, in part of that obviously because of COVID, actually did an informal peace deal that they're currently in the process of implementing. But that was a really, really big deal because they've got a lot of common economic interests, and all of those have been put on the back burner whilst they've been kind of like fighting over a few hundred square meters of kind of rock.
Yeah, didn't they have a all-out war back in the 60s over that?
They did in the I believe it was actually 1960. Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. They're squashing old beefs because, I mean, it's a silly thing to fight for. A bunch of mountainous terrain. It's like you said, It's like 100 square kilometers.
I mean, less even than that. And so now they've agreed that they're going to do joint patrols along the border line. These places are completely uninhabited. There's no civilians whatsoever.
Yeah, it'd be different if it was like fertile farmland or rich in resources, but
No,
now it's just
and
a
and,
bunch of
and
mountains.
and they've literally been missing out on kind of like billions of dollars of mutual trade deals. So they finally realized this is like crazy. We're like losing so much money because the Chinese have this attitude was, well, you know, and we see this with Vietnam and the Philippines, where they say, you know, ignore the fact that we're trying to steal half of your exclusive economic zone. Let's just, you know, be friends as far as business is concerned. But in terms of, you know, territorial disputes, they'll have what they always call put it on the back burner. But India, quite wisely, has refused to put the issue on the back burner. And they're like, you know, either we're almost severed relations or this gets dealt with. And now they do genuinely appear to have made some significant headway. So obviously they met together at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings the previous week, and that doubtless kind of greased the skill.
Well, and I know that Chinese and Russian trade, I mean, they have a pretty good tit for tat on what they need. I mean, Chinese need resources, Russia needs electronics, but as far as the other, I mean, those two countries going into India, does India have as much, you know, that they need or can offer to Russia and China as Russia and China can offer to each other? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, India is very, very resource hungry. So they're willing to ignore US sanctions in relation to both raw materials and fossil fuels at the moment. And Dr. Jay Shankar, their external affairs minister, the equivalent of Tony Blinken in America, he was quite adamant about that. He just said, you know, we can't do without this, and we're not going to kind of starve ourselves just to make the Americans happy.
Right.
But I would say that the friendly meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping was actually a very significant part of the success.
Like, what could China and Russia want that India produces? I mean, their metal is crap. I mean, Indian metal is one step below Chinesium.
Yeah. Obviously, they've got a lot of labor. They do actually produce quite a lot of rice. So things like that are, you know, obviously in global demand.
And aren't they also
add
going
their
to be
emails?
I said, aren't they also going to be used for that shipbuilding and sub building program where Russian scientists are going to use Indian ports to construct a new
yes. So
ship fleet?
That's definitely still under consideration on the eastern coast of India. And Prime Minister Modi specifically made reference to the INSTC, which is the International North-South Transport Corridor, which basically goes from the west coast of India to Iran and then through either the Caspian Sea or Azerbaijan and then via Moscow all the way to St. Petersburg.
Yeah, because I was having trouble thinking. It's like, well, what does America get off of India aside from cheap call center labor and internet scammers? So I was wondering what, you know, I probably guess the same things that China and Russia might want is cheap laborers. They have no shortage of people, I guess.
Well,
I'm surprised Russia hasn't tried to bribe a bunch of Indians to go to Ukraine yet, or maybe they already have.
Well, they did send some Indians to Ukraine, and that actually that caused quite a stink, and they had to release them and hand them back over to the Indian government. It now appears that they're relying, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this in the media in the last few days as well, much more on North Korean soldiers.
Yeah, we talked about that last episode. I was curious to see how North Korea does in combat situations, and apparently it's not real well.
And I heard somewhere that South Korea was offering to send some of their troops to Ukraine in order to fight the North Korean troops if they had to. And it's like,
well, I mean, combat experience is invaluable.
Yeah, but I mean, is Ukraine just going to be like World War arena?
But hey, I'm all for it. If it keeps the rest of the country peaceful, we'll just designate Ukraine as like the powers battle zone. Yeah. Sorry, Ukraine. This is where it happens at.
Yeah, crazy.
Well, the Ukrainian situation is still very, very difficult. The Russians are clearly using North Korean manpower up to a division that has been indicated as being in the process of arriving the last few days and going into next week.
Mhm.
Whereas the South Koreans supposedly are saying that they're going to send technology like additional drones to North Korea, maybe like first aid facilities and some logistics officers. But they also want to send some special forces guys to observe the performance of the North Koreans in combat.
So I don't know why it came into my head all of a sudden, but there was that scene in Braveheart where the one of the commanders goes up to Longshanks and says, should we ready the longbowmen? And he's like, no, arrows are
Send in
far
the-
too expensive. Send in the Irish. And so it's like, is Russia using these North Korean troops because they have to or because they can? Is this a send in the Irish type of scenario?
Sending in the Irish, yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, it would appear that they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for well-trained infantry. There definitely is a similar situation for the Ukrainian armed forces. So the North Koreans have got their own drones, they've got some of their own artillery, they've got a vast amount of ammo. So it is quite a package deal that the Russians are getting. And even today, they were suggesting that in the area around the Kursk Oblast that the Ukrainians did that incursion into, that there are a lot of debadged Polish and British special forces.
So it's interesting you brought up the Kursk region because my friend Alex sent me an article the other day. I'll see if I can bring it up here real quick, but it was about how the Russian military is saying that the number of people that went in to the Kursk region numbered something like 26,000, and they're all dead now.
The Ukrainians.
Yeah. It was a really kind of a weird way that they put the wording, and it might have been a translated document or something, but it said something like there was Russia. This is from eadaily.com, and it said something about how they were called over the past month or so in the Kursk direction. In my opinion, there have already been 26,000 losses, also sanitary and irretrievable, Vladimir Putin said. So I asked, like, what does that mean? Sanitary and irretrievable. And I guess it's like they died of like wounds and sepsis and just being unable to treat their wounded or whatever. And irretrievable, obviously they couldn't get their dead out of there, but like 26,000 Ukrainians tried to go into a region of Russia, and now they're gone. According to this article.
Yes. So, what do you think the ramifications of that are?
I'm starting to wonder how many men are left in Ukraine.
No, that's an entirely legitimate point.
I saw that, to throw another thing in too, when they show the Ukrainian men partying in nightclubs, and they're like, what are these guys doing? I saw an article last week where they're posting up outside nightclubs catching young men now. They're really scraping through and their draft age is weird. It's like 26 and above. It's like they're
25. It was 27. Reduced it to 25. But obviously everyone's saying, why isn't it 18 like it is in most other countries?
Right.
but you've got to look at their economy was in utter meltdown in the period kind of like 1999 to about 2004. So they've got a huge demographic gap in current 20 to 25-year-olds. That both. Normally, those things are. I'm trying to describe this shape. They're quite a regular shape, and there's a very even spread. But around that 5-year period, people, because of the economic hardships, weren't having children in Ukraine, and there's a very, very distinct kind of age gap amongst their civilian population, assuming they haven't fled already.
Yeah.
And then in terms of family and women having children and stuff, you get all your 18 to 25-year-olds killed. That's going to be quite a problem for sustaining your population going forward in the long run.
Well, luckily, NATO has a solution for that, and it's what they're already doing in the rest of Europe. It's called infinity migrants.
Well, they're talking about reinstating the draft in lots of European countries as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I didn't know that most European countries had done away with it. I mean, some people even think the United States has done away with it. No, it's just lying in wait.
Well, it's suspended. Most of the European countries, they've suspended theirs as well, so they can bring them back in.
Well, America still have active people working on draft boards. They keep all the records in place and have the system ready to go.
Yes.
Yep.
But yeah, it's terrible. I mean, we talked about this on last week's show. I mean, the value of a male aged 18 to 24 in society is way more than it used to be in World War II. I mean, the amount of investment you have to get somebody to that age in the modern world is, I think Russia is going to realize that they screwed up. What they're spending on bodies is nowhere near worth what they thought they would get. Even though it's rich in resources, it's still not worth it.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
I don't know. I still don't think that this is a war of resources, because Russia has more land and resources than anywhere else on planet Earth. So there was something else at play here, and what it is, I don't know if we'll ever know. We got what they tell us, but how can you believe that? Denazification of Ukraine. Yeah, okay, whatever. If you say so.
Yeah, at this point, it's just such a silly situation. It's just like both sides just end it, and Zelensky doesn't want to. If Russia, I get the feeling that Russia said, all right, but they won't ever say it. All right, we fucked up. Let's go back to the border before this all happened. I think Zelensky would say no. He wants Crimea back too.
Yeah. Well, it's been part of the peace deal for the long time, is that he wants Crimea back, and that's just a non-starter.
Yeah. And I don't know if Russia got greedy or what, but it seems like when they took Crimea, I mean, people weren't up in arms. It's like, oh shit, they took Crimea. What's next? But the world kind of accepted it. They understood that Russia needed it. But these strips of land that they want to take on their border, it's not as acceptable. But we're getting up on an hour. I think we hit on everything we wanted to hit on. We got some world events. We got Simon in here. We talked about Trump. Make sure to watch your Nazi rally tomorrow.
Yep, and we got, like we said in the got informed in the chat that JD Vance went on Tim Dillon's podcast. So I think I'm gonna go upstairs, play some Red Dead Redemption, and watch that.
And check out Tim Dillon. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's been interesting. He does really good on a podcast format. I don't really like him on an interview type format with, a formal interview. I like JD Vance a lot better on podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Trump not. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Trump on. He gets so far in the weeds so easy. I mean, to the point that sometimes I'm like, get this guy some Adderall, maybe keep him on track on these. But yeah, check him out. Check out that Tim Dillon one. I don't know what Harris is doing. If you want to listen to her, see what the other side's up to. But I literally cannot listen to her. Her voice is like listening. I've got that deal where people are chewing. I can't. It's same effect on me. Just what misphonia, I think they call it. I just can't handle it. Makes me want to gouge my ears out and scream. But thanks for joining us on your Saturday. We'll be back next Saturday. Check out Sam and Simon on Weaponized News at 4 Eastern, right, Simon? I always screw this up because I don't watch you guys live.
Yeah, no, it's 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern.
4 Pacific, 7 Eastern. I'm always a day behind watching their show because it doesn't work out for the live time, but check them out. You can get much more in depth on the stuff we talk about on here with Simon. It's a great show. Go follow him. Follow us here on Rumble and YouTube. We're on Facebook, but never get pushed out. You can follow us there for whatever. We don't even post there because that place fucking sucks. But from myself and Hobbs, we appreciate you guys and stay honky.
Get better soon, son.